All right, let's dive into the world of economics. We're going to explore some really cool concepts, kind of like taking Econ 101, but way more fun. And we've got Sophia along for the ride as she begins her own economic journey, our guide. Excerpts from Economy and its History A1 level.
Sounds like a plan. Sophia's journey actually begins with some pretty basic questions. You know, the kind we all think about sometimes.
Like what?
Like, why do we trade? Or how do countries get rich? These questions might seem simple on the surface, but they get at the core of what economics is all about.
Makes sense. So the book explains that economics basically comes down to managing resources, like money, land, and labor.
Yeah, it's similar to managing your household budget, making sure there's enough for rent, groceries, and maybe even some fun stuff.
Oh, I see. It's about making choices with what you have.
Exactly. And it's fascinating that the word economy actually comes from a Greek word that means household management. So we're all economic decision makers every day, even if we don't realize it.
So if we think about it, how did people trade before money?
Hmm.
Like way back in the day? Did they really just swap, say, a chicken for a loaf of bread?
You're talking about bartering. And yeah, you're right. Imagine trading your extra pottery for fish from your neighbor. That was bartering, a simple, direct exchange.
What if your neighbor didn't want more pottery? Or what if they were allergic to fish? Bartering sounds like it could get complicated quickly.
Exactly. You've hit on some of the drawbacks of bartering. It works fine in small communities where everyone knows each other and needs are simple. But as societies grow, bartering just isn't practical. And that's where money comes in.
Money, the game changer. But what did people use as money before we had dollar bills and credit cards?
Well, early forms of money were often things people found in nature, like shells. Then came precious metals like gold because they held their value and were easy to divide.
So how did they know how much gold to trade for a certain amount of, say, wheat?
Good question. Determining value was a bit trickier then. But the point is that societies were moving towards a more standardized system. And there's another fascinating example. Salt was also used as money in some parts of the world.
Salt.
Yeah, it was so valuable, they called it white gold sometimes.
White gold. That's wild. I mean, I guess it makes sense. Salt was essential for preserving food.
Exactly. You can see how the idea of value changes over time and in different places, but then with coins and paper money, trade became much easier and more efficient. That's really what paved the way for more complex economies.
Okay, so we've got the basics of trade down. But if you were creating an economy from scratch, what lessons would you use from history? And what new ideas might you try?
That's a great question. Well, history teaches us that no single economic system is perfect, you know? Each has pros and cons. Take traditional economies, for example.
Traditional economies, like what exactly?
Well, picture a small village relying on farming, fishing, maybe some local crafts. Maybe you've even visited a place like that on vacation. These economies are often self-sufficient and really grounded in tradition.
Yeah, I can see that.
But they can also be very vulnerable to things they can't control, like natural disasters or big shifts in global markets.
That makes sense. So what about the kind of economy we have today? What makes it tick?
Well, most modern countries have what's called a market economy. This emphasizes individual choice and competition. Businesses decide what to make based on what people want to buy.
So it's like voting with your wallet. What you choose to buy matters.
Exactly. Your choices as a consumer have power, you know.
Yeah.
They influence the overall economy, from what's produced to where people work and how money gets invested.
And so are there different flavors of market economies?
Oh, absolutely. Some have more government involvement to tackle things like inequality or protecting the environment. Others prefer less government intervention, believing that the market can sort itself out. Then you have planned economies where the government makes most of the decisions.
Like the Soviet Union.
Right. The Soviet Union is a good example. The state dictated what goods were produced, how much they cost, and even who got them. That kind of system might sound good because it can create more equality in some ways, but it often stifles innovation and individual freedom.
So it sounds like most economies aren't one type or the other. It's more complicated than that.
You got it. Most economies today are actually what we call mixed economies. They blend elements of both market and planned systems, trying to find a good balance between individual freedom and collective well-being.
Right. Like trying to find that sweet spot. Speaking of economic forces, I always hear people talk about supply and demand. What does that actually mean? Like, how does it work?
It is a core principle in economics. It's this fascinating interplay between how much of something is available and how much people want it. Imagine a scale. One side is supply, how much of something there is, and the other side is demand, how much people want it.
Okay, I'm picturing the scale.
Now, when something's scarce, meaning there's not much of it, demand usually goes up, and so does the price. Sophia's dad had this great analogy for it. He said it was like money shrinking.
Money shrinking. I like that. It's like your money suddenly buys less because prices have gone up.
That's it. Inflation is a good example of this money shrinking effect. But
Mhm.
think about limited edition sneakers or a special fruit that's only around for a short time.
Like mangoes in the winter.
Exactly. Because those things are scarce, people are willing to pay more for them. Their desire outweighs the available supply, and that pushes the price up. That's supply and demand in action.
So we've got these different economic systems all trying to find that right balance, right? Between supply and demand, individual freedom, and also making sure everyone benefits. But how does all of this work on like a global scale?
Hmm. Well, think about ancient times. Think about the Silk Road.
The Silk Road, the one that was like this massive trade route.
That's the one. And it wasn't just about trading silk and spices. It really showed how connected economies were, even way back then. The Silk Road spread ideas and new technologies. It really showed this human need to connect with each other, you know? And of course, to get cool stuff from faraway places.
Yeah, it's amazing how interconnected the world has always been, even before the internet. Speaking of big changes, how did things like the Industrial Revolution impact the world economy?
Oh, the Industrial Revolution was huge. It completely changed things. We got mass production, factories popping up everywhere, and these groundbreaking technologies. It definitely boosted economic growth and created jobs.
But I bet there were downsides too, right?
You bet. Think about pollution, for instance, and the way workers were sometimes exploited. The Industrial Revolution shows us that progress often comes with a price. We have to be mindful of that, you know, especially today with automation and AI.
That's true. It's like this ongoing dilemma figuring out how to balance progress with its potential consequences.
Exactly. And it brings up this really important question. How can we ensure that progress benefits everyone, not just a select few? That's where understanding things like inflation and unemployment becomes so important.
Okay, so inflation.
Yeah.
That's when prices just keep going up, right? Like
Yeah.
everything gets more expensive. Sophia's dad's analogy of money shrinking really makes you think about how inflation impacts what you can actually buy.
Right. It's like your money is losing its value. Inflation can be really hard on people, especially if their income doesn't increase along with those rising prices.
I bet. And then unemployment, well, that's a whole other issue. It's not just about individuals and families struggling. It affects the entire economy.
Absolutely. When people are out of work, they're not spending money, businesses suffer, and the whole economic engine slows down. It's a chain reaction.
It's true. It's not just about losing a paycheck. It affects your sense of purpose and well-being too.
Yeah.
What can we do to kind of lessen these economic hardships?
Hmm.
Like how do we create a system that's more stable and fair?
Well, many societies have what we call social safety nets. Things like food assistance programs, help with housing, access to education and healthcare. These are designed to support people when times are tough.
They're like a safety net, right?
Yeah.
Catching people when they fall.
Exactly. The idea is to create a more equitable society where everyone has a chance to thrive. But figuring out the best way to do that is tricky. There's a lot of debate about how to design these programs, how much support to provide, and how to encourage self-sufficiency at the same time.
So are social safety nets always a good thing? I've heard some argue that they discourage people from working.
Well, yeah, that's a common concern. Finding that balance between providing support and encouraging people to be self-reliant is a complex issue. Some folks believe in a stronger safety net that provides a solid foundation for everyone. Others think the focus should be on creating jobs and opportunities so people can climb the economic ladder. It's an ongoing conversation.
So it's about constantly adjusting our approach as things change, right? Making sure the system works for everyone.
Yep, it's like fine-tuning this complex machine we call the economy. But it's not just about what happens within a single country, right? Global trade plays a big role too.
That's right. No country is an island when it comes to economics.
Exactly. We all rely on trade with other countries to some extent. It's why we can enjoy tropical fruits even in places where they don't grow naturally. Global trade lets countries specialize in what they're good at producing and then exchange those goods with other nations.
So it's about each country playing to its strengths. Makes sense. But how do we make sure this global trading system is fair? How do we make sure everyone benefits?
Ugh. Now that's a tough one. It's something economists and policymakers wrestle with all the time. We've got international trade agreements, tariffs, and all sorts of regulations that try to manage the flow of goods and services between countries.
So it's like this big balancing act.
Yeah, you could say that. The goal is to encourage free and fair trade while also protecting local industries and workers.
Right, because if one country can produce something much cheaper than another, it could hurt businesses and jobs in the more expensive country.
Exactly. It's a complex web of interconnected factors. But speaking of key players, where do banks fit into all of this?
Oh yeah, banks. They seem to be at the heart of it all.
They are pretty central. Banks act as intermediaries, they connect people who have money to save with those who need to borrow money.
So they take money from savers and lend it out to people who need it.
You got it. They give loans to businesses so they can expand, and to individuals for things like buying a home or getting an education. This flow of money, what we call capital, is really important for economic growth and creating new jobs.
It's like the lifeblood of the economy, right?
Yeah.
Keeping things moving and growing.
That's a great way to put it. But things are changing rapidly, right? Technology is disrupting everything.
That's true. We've got online banking, mobile payments, even cryptocurrencies. How are banks keeping up with all this change?
Well, technology is totally transforming the financial sector, that's for sure. We've got these new fintech companies popping up, coming up with all sorts of innovative ways to make financial services more accessible and efficient. That's exciting to see, really.
Yeah, it seems like technology could really change the game when it comes to finances. But what about the risks? Are there downsides to all this disruption?
Oh, absolutely. As we rely more and more on technology for our financial lives, we have to be really careful about things like data security and privacy. There's also the question of algorithmic bias. And let's not forget the debate about cryptocurrencies and their potential impact on, well, basically everything.
Right. It seems like every new technology comes with a whole new set of challenges. And it makes you wonder, what does all this mean for the future of the global economy?
That's the thing about economics, isn't it? It's this constantly evolving field that reflects human behavior, technological change, and the world around us. It's a fascinating and challenging field.
Wow. We've covered so much ground in our little econ deep dive with Sophia. From bartering to global trade to technology shaking things up, it's clear that economics is, well, kind of complicated.
It really is multifaceted, isn't it? And always changing. We've gone from the historical roots of economic systems to supply and demand, globalization, tech advancements. It's been a whirlwind. What stood out to you most?
I think what surprised me is how much economics is actually about people. Choices, how we use our resources, and how we try to meet our needs. It's not just numbers and charts.
That's a great point. It really is human-centered at its core. It's about how individuals, businesses, and governments make decisions when resources are limited and desires are, well, unlimited. It's about trade-offs and navigating a complex world.
And it's definitely not just theoretical. Economics affects our daily lives. From grocery prices to jobs to healthcare, it impacts our communities and even the entire planet.
Absolutely. Understanding these basic principles can really empower us. It helps us make sense of the news, understand policies, and really participate in important conversations about the challenges and opportunities facing our world.
It's like we've been given this new way of seeing things, a deeper understanding of how everything's connected. It can be overwhelming, for sure, but also empowering. We have a role to play in shaping things.
That's so true. We're all part of this economic experiment, whether we realize it or not. Our choices as consumers, voters, investors, even just as individuals, have a ripple effect. They influence markets, policies, and ultimately what kind of world we create for the future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's one question or insight that stuck with you? Something that piqued your interest or maybe made you want to learn more about a specific topic?
Hold on to that question, that curiosity. Economics is a lifelong learning process, It's about asking questions, seeking answers, and constantly reevaluating what we think as the world changes.
That's a great point. And who knows, maybe exploring economics will lead to new discoveries, new perspectives, and even inspire you to become a more informed and active participant in shaping our world. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the ever-changing landscape of economics. We'll see you next time.